ever since its inception, China has used coercion in different domains as a tool to achieve its ambition of becoming a superpower. Today, when it is stronger than ever before, it is mysteriously absent from the battlefield of West Asia. Mysteriously, in the sense I'm talking of the diplomatic domain, not exactly the military domain. It is not seen. Now, whether it is strategy or lack of it is what we will try to understand today in our conversation with Shri Vijay Gokhale, former Foreign Secretary. Welcome to Samvad, sir.
Thank you, Mayank, for having me on your show again.
Sir,
It's
before
always
coming
a
to the question, sir, I'll let the audience know about your recently published book, China's War, the Politics and Diplomacy Behind Its Military Coercion. Now, this is the book required exactly at this moment because it gives us a peek into the mind of how China uses coercion and military in this sense to achieve its objectives. It's a wonderful book, and I would recommend because I would recommend people that they go out and if they want to understand, which they should understand China, then it is a must-read book. And the other books sir has written, and I've read all of them, Crosswinds, Nehru, Zhou, and the Anglo-American competition over China, the long game, how the Chinese negotiate with India, after Tiananmen, the rise of China, Tiananmen Square, the making of a protest. Sir, your book, China's War, the Politics and Diplomacy Behind Its Military Version. Rather delving into it, sir, I would request you to tell us something about it.
Thank you, Mayank. You know, China is a very important neighbor. We have a very complex relationship. We have an unsettled border with them. Therefore, understanding China has been something that I have always been talking about since I completed my government service. And this book, in a sense, is a companion to the one I earlier wrote, which is The Long Game: How the Chinese Negotiate with India. So the earlier book was how China negotiates. In order to make the book interesting, I've put in 5 case studies. So I have looked at China's conflicts with the United States, the Soviet Union, and Vietnam, but also the contemporary military coercion that they have exercised against the Philippines in the South China Sea and against Taiwan in the Taiwan Strait. And there are really 2 purposes to this book. The first question I asked was, what motivates the Chinese to use military force against a neighbor or against any other country? And then what are the strategy and tactics that it uses? And the second question I looked at is, under what circumstances does China initiate military conflict? So, what we are looking at in the book is the internal politics of China, its international relations, the information and propaganda that it uses, and of course, the military options that it uses, and how these all work together to lead China to a conflict. The objective really was in the final chapter to draw some conclusions or some findings about what we might look for in a future scenario where the Chinese might wish to use or will use military coercion against us. So I think it's a book which has both a historical significance and a very contemporary relevance. And I'm looking forward to readership feedback. So through your program, I would urge your viewers also to give both you and me feedback on the book so that, you know, if any improvement can be done, I'd be very happy to do that. But thank you for giving me the opportunity to talk about the book.
It's a very timely book, sir, because I see it relating directly to what is happening in West Asia as of now. Because we have seen China suddenly adopting a very silent sort of a stand. It's trying to maintain sort of neutrality. It seems to be reluctant to get involved in what is happening in West Asia. Because I was seeing this statement, number of statements. I've culled out 2. And she's saying that all efforts conducive to restoring peace and stands for resolving it. He's talking about China and stands for resolving disputes through political and diplomatic means, which is very unlikely coming out of China, which is generally in a very more muscular approach generally. And it seems to be a balancing act between different combatants. Now, while talking to MBS, Saudi Arabia, now he said that the Strait of Hormuz should maintain normal passage as this serves the common interest of regional countries and the international community. China seems to be invisible from any diplomatic efforts also. It's barely there, I would say, although Chinese might not like it, but they're barely there, and hardly any efforts at the United Nations Security Council also to somehow bring this conflict to an end. So what exactly is behind this calculated neutrality?
Yeah, so as you correctly said, China has not taken a frontal position on this conflict. And you are absolutely right that the United Nations is barely seen and heard in this conflict. And that is actually a reflection on the collapsing international order. But non participation by China should not be taken to mean non involvement. China has many stakes in the region. 50% of its oil comes from the Gulf. That is 5 million barrels per day. More importantly, 30% of its LPG and LNG come from that source. China has a huge trade with these countries in that region, almost 400 billion. And of course, there are two-way investments. As you know, the Saudis and the Emiratis and the Kuwaitis also have a lot of investments in China. But beyond this very limited region, China has much bigger strategic interests as well, because 60% of its trade passes through the Suez Canal. So for them, stability of the Indian Ocean is very important. Now, invisibility should not therefore be tantamount to assuming that they are doing nothing. First of all, their inaction is in a sense a continuation of the policy of the late leader Deng Xiaoping, who said, hide and bide. Don't be hasty to take a leadership position. And when others are making a mistake, let them make a mistake. Secondly, of course, they are happy to see the Americans bogged down. But on the other hand, the prolonged conflict doesn't suit them. So behind the scenes, they are nudging various players. The Iranian foreign minister was in Beijing earlier this week. They have nudged the Iranians to be more reasonable on the opening of the Hormuz Strait. With the United States, you have quoted President Xi as saying it is important to maintain a balance and we should not allow conflict to spread in the region. And of course, through Pakistan, the Chinese, in fact, are ensuring that their interests are fully protected. So Pakistan is their front at the moment. They are reasonably sure that all their interests will be protected by Pakistan in the process of mediation. If that is the case, there's really no need for them to take a lead. But we must be very clear, China has very, very important goals in this whole conflict. In the very short term, which is 1 to 2 months, the next 1 to 2 months, obviously their objective will be to end the conflict and to resume petroleum supplies. That is the objective of all of us, including India. In the medium term, which is the next 6 months to 1 year, their effort will be to ensure that the United States does not force its peace on Iran, and that they can sustain an Iran which retains agency in the region and which, in a sense, balances others in the region, so that the United States does not completely run over the Iranians. In the long term, we must remember their strategic goal is to take up residence in the Indian Ocean. We know that the PLA Navy now has a third aircraft carrier group. Our expectation is that in the next 2 to 3 years, as that carrier group becomes operational, it is likely to be stationed or directed towards the Indian Ocean region. Like the United States, China wants to become an Indian Ocean power. If that is the case, Iran is a very important part of the puzzle for them. And therefore, they have all these objectives, short term, medium term, and long term. They are working towards it. They don't necessarily have to work towards it by making noise or by showing themselves in front. But we should not confuse their non-appearance with either neutrality or with a sort of almost as if they've gone to sleep. But that would be making a mistake. The Chinese are long-term players. They are very studied players. They are great diplomats. They are great strategists. And that's what they're doing at the moment. At least that's my view.
Yes. So the sort of balancing which is going on in West Asia. Now, China has this $400 billion 25-year comprehensive cooperation agreement with Iran, which as of now, to the naked eye and not to somebody who's not a diplomat, sir, it seems like an extractive hedge, because you look behind the scenes, sir. Most of people like us, we look at what appears before us. So it looks like an extractive energy hedge, because they have this relationship with the Emiratis also, as you said, sir. So how will countries look at China as a potential ally, I would ask, in the face of, because America it's very erratic. Its behavior it's always been erratic, but more so right now. So they were looking at China as an ally, a more dependable, more stable ally. But when you start balancing two opposing camps, so how is this fence sitting seen in the diplomatic world and the leadership world?
I think let me begin with a basic statement. Where there is an unequal relationship, the stronger always tries to extract from the weaker. And India is no exception to that rule either. So I don't think there is a uniqueness about China extracting more from Iran than the other way around. But let us be clear on one thing, Mayank. Like it or not, China is the only major power today besides the United States. If we have seen anything in the last 1 year, it is that the multipolar world is a myth. There are no other poles in the world. If that is the case, and the United States is the existential threat to Iran, then whether Iran likes it or not, they have no option but to mend relations and build relations and keep relations with China. Now, post-conflict as well, once a peace is done, and we don't know the shape of that peace, can the Iranians trust the Europeans? I doubt it, because the whole agenda of the West has been to bring about a collapse of the theocratic mullah regime in Iran. That being the case, when Iran rebuilds, where will it get its capital, its technology, its equipment? There is only one other place in this world, and that is the People's Republic of China. Yes, it is true that other emerging economies may be able to supply bits and pieces of this, India, Brazil, South Korea, and others. But let's be honest, we don't have the wherewithal to provide the kind of technology, equipment, and capital that the People's Republic of China has. So even in rebuilding and reconstruction, Iran needs the Chinese. And for China, this is a win-win situation, because you are not rebuilding on credit. The Iranians have oil. So you give technology and equipment on the one hand, and you get paid in oil on the other, which is something that China needs. So it is a win-win situation for both, actually. And finally, of course, the United States is going to stay in the Indian Ocean, obviously, and Iran wants a balancing factor there. Now, today, China is the only country that can balance the United States. So they would like to see a stronger Chinese presence in the Indian Ocean. If they can use their territorial and geographical advantage to that effect, why would they not do so? The point I want to make is this: Iran may or may not like the way in which China is not being active in the conflict, or they would like the Chinese to be more helpful towards them and feel the Chinese are not doing that. But in the medium term, they need China on every front for their security, for their reconstruction, and for their long-term objectives. So it's in diplomacy, there's no such thing as liking or disliking a country. National interest prevails, and China's national interest at this point dictates, Iran's national interest at this point dictates that a strong relationship with China is a strategic necessity.
Sir, there is this internal Pentagon report which is pointing out to rapid depletion of critical munitions in the American armory, the high-end ones. And according to the Telegraph, since the start of war, now this is a report which is around 10 days old. The Telegraph reported that the Americans have fired 1,100 long-range stealth cruise missiles that was perhaps designated and kept in reserve for any conflict with the Russians or perhaps the Chinese. So this is getting depleted very fast. Now, Chinese have a stranglehold on the rare earth metals and other critical minerals. The US capacity to replenish these weapons gets affected because the Chinese have control over these minerals. So as you said, sir, China in a different sense is in a win-win situation. Why will it not want the war to prolong so that, I mean, its principal adversary gets weakened?
So that's the conventional view, and it seems to be the logical view, but I don't think that logic applies in Beijing at the moment. For a variety of reasons. Firstly, of course, although China has the largest strategic oil reserves in the world, close to 1.4 billion barrels, but the fact is that is only going to last for another 3 to 4 months, given the fact that China's economy consumes an enormous amount of energy. When that reserve starts drawing down, what happens to the Chinese economy? So China would not want to see a prolonged disruption of petroleum supplies from the Gulf. That's the first important point. The second is, let's leave aside the energy requirement. There is very heavy dependence on downstream raw material. For instance, even though China is the world's largest fertilizer producer, the feedstock, which is sulfur, comes from the Gulf region. You stop that feedstock, and China is a country which may in area be double or triple our size, but their arable land is much less than ours. In other words, feeding that 1.6 or 1.5 or 1.4 billion population has always been a challenge. If there is no fertilizer, or if there is a shortage of fertilizer, there will be implications on social stability. And China has to think about that. Thirdly, of course, they also need the petroleum feedstocks for their supply chains. Naphtha, for instance, LNG, they run 30% of the world's factories. Now, can you imagine the consequence, of course, for the rest of the world? But the Chinese are more worried about the consequence for themselves. If those factories start reducing their production and, you have to start laying off workers. So there are multiple implications of the war continuing, and by any balance sheet, no Chinese leader is going to say, I will take a risk on everything from my energy to my feedstocks to my supply chains, because I'm quite enjoying the spectacle of the American arsenal being worn down or because of overusage. Right. So I think in the long term, if you look at it from Beijing's perspective, yes, of course, America's involvement in the Gulf has deflected attention from East Asia, has depleted American stocks and so on. But now I think the pain is beginning to be felt all over the world, including in Beijing. And for a variety of reasons, I don't think that China would now want the Gulf War to continue, even if it means a depletion, further depletion of American military stocks.
So there's a view, mostly in the West, that China is no longer an aspiring superpower, but it is yet very reluctant to display the leadership, diplomacy, and expected of a superpower. And China is more focused on advancing its economic interests, its technological interests, that growth. It is more focused on that, and this focus makes it averse to taking risk in other areas. And that view says, sir, I'm putting across that view, that how long can China afford to be on the sidelines of a highly contested global order? Can they afford it?
See, Mayank, I think that we are all influenced by Western academic research and writings, and therefore we look at great powers or hegemons from the Western perspective. Now, China has been a hegemon in the past historically, but it does not exercise hegemony the way the West does. It doesn't go and conquer countries the way that the West has traditionally done in the colonial period, or in a sense, impose themselves by attacking countries the way the West has done in this century. Whether you look at Libya, you look at Iraq, you look at Syria, you look at Afghanistan, you now look at Iran, you look at Venezuela, these are all Western adventures. Now, it would be a mistake to think, therefore, that merely because the Chinese are not doing so, they are not acting as a major power. If you look at China's global spread in the last 20 years, the Belt and Road Initiative, dominant in about 60 to 80 countries, the fact that China is the largest trading nation in the world and the largest bilateral trading nation with practically almost the entire world, the fact that Chinese dominate in supplying technology like 5G or like DeepSeek or even the fact that China dominates in weapon sales to the global south speaks to its great power status. The fact today is that aside from the United States, no other country has the sort of diplomatic influence that China has, not even we. That also speaks to its status. Now, when you put all these together, you cannot but conclude that China is a great power. The only thing is that it is not a great power in the way that the United States is a great power. It has not built military bases all over the world. It does not have defense treaties with many countries. It does not go and attack countries because it feels its interests are not being protected. And why should they do so? The Chinese learn from history. They are watching how America is overreaching its imperial power. They have seen how Britain and the West declined after the Second World War because of what was called imperial overreach. And they still feel they don't have the building blocks for exercising imperial power. They're putting them in place slowly but surely. Their economy, their leadership in technology, their diplomatic relations with the global south, their efforts to change the whole concept of technical standards, procedures, regulations, and rules through the Belt and Road Initiative, their efforts to build an alternate multilateral system through the institutions like the Asian Investment Infrastructure Bank and the New Development Bank, their efforts to create alternative payment methods like WeChat or Union Pay so that they don't use Google Pay, or for that matter, search engines like Sina Weibo so they don't use Google. This is the only country doing that. We are not doing that, nor is any other country, right? So they are matching the United States step for step, although the US still retains the technological edge. And they have concluded it will take another 15 to 20 years to reach that level. When they reach that level, and I think the goal is 2049, China will be a full-fledged hegemon. Unless, of course, there is a catastrophic collapse domestically. That none of us can predict. But short of that, our assumption that because China does not behave like America, therefore it is not an aspiring superpower anymore, or is sitting on the sidelines of the world, would, I think, be a big mistake that certainly India should not commit. The rest of the world, I really don't care what they think about China. We must understand China. And China is very much on the path to being a hegemon.
So being a hegemon by 2049, that is the outlier, that is the goal there, perhaps the Chinese are looking at. And then you spoke of the third battle carrier group, aircraft battle carrier group, which for all practical purposes is going to be stationed in the Indian Ocean. Now that suddenly it makes me thinking, sir, how should India look at it? I mean, where are we placed vis-a-vis China? Because the growing, we already have an existing border issue, which does not seem to be getting resolved anytime soon. So where is India placed, sir? I mean, I'm at a loss. I don't understand. I mean, the Chinese, the first country which can face coercion apart from the smaller nations around China is India. So how is India preparing for it? How prepared are we for it?
Well, I think every Indian needs to ask herself or himself this question. We talk of this concept of the two-front war, China-Pakistan. My point is the two-front war is China alone. We have China on the northern border, and by 2030, we will have China in the Indian Ocean. This is the first time in history after the 1500s that a Chinese naval presence will be south of India in the northern Indian Ocean. It's a paradigm shift. And these are two fronts by the same country. Add to that Pakistan, and you're actually dealing with a potential three-front war. So, in that sense, the people of India need to be very much aware of China, not only to the north, but also to the south. The southern states, for instance, which are the economic powerhouse of our country, have been largely insulated from conflicts on the northern border. But of course, their own economy will be deeply affected with China being present in the Indian Ocean. And therefore, now, to be fair, Mayank, the government is well apprised of the situation. You are seeing news very recently about this Greater Nicobar Island project and the controversy behind it. But the fact of the matter is, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands strategically are placed in a manner which allows India to basically control movement between the Malacca Strait and the Suez Canal. To the east, you have the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. To the west, you have the Lakshadweep Islands. And both of them straddle all the sea lanes of communication between the Malacca Strait and the Suez Canal. So we are very strategically placed geographically, but you have to leverage that geography. For decades, India didn't even know how many islands we had. This government has done that census. For decades, we did not even develop a single one of our islands. This government has begun the development of islands in the Andaman Nicobar chain, but also in Lakshadweep. For centuries, we ignored everything south of India as not in our neighborhood. But this government has given importance to the Maldives, for instance, but beyond the Maldives, to Mauritius, to Seychelles, to Madagascar, to Comoros. So the government is apprised, they're seized of the matter. But, just the government being seized of the matter is not good enough. Your industry has to be seized of the matter and start investing there. Your strategic community has to be seized of the matter and start writing about it. Your media has to be seized about the matter and do education to the public, not simply rhetoric about the fact that it is either a very good thing or a very bad thing. Because, sometimes big powers like India have to do things which don't make economic sense, but are strategically necessary. Investing in a semiconductor industry might not be a good idea for many other smaller countries. But for India, it may not make financial sense, but it is a strategic necessity. You starve India of chips, and your entire economy and your defense will collapse. Can you afford that? So, if that means you have to spend, that may not be profitable, is something that we as Indians have to bear on our shoulders.
Now, there's a very surprising thing which I noticed, sir. It's not a question, it's just an observation that whenever something related to, sort of countering China strategically comes up, there is a whole industry which goes up with different interests. Somebody protecting ecology, somebody protecting culture, and it is an industry which seems to be suddenly propping up and stopping that project. But I'll come
But
to the
to be fair, I think debate is essential in a democratic society.
I know.
And I'm very glad that there are alternate voices, because the day those alternate voices cease, you will have 1962 again. When everyone is in sync and sings the same tune as the government, it is bad news for the people of the country. But at the end of it all, our people, after debating all those issues, must have a strategic sense about us. And that is where I think in this particular case, the government's actions make sense. I fully agree the ecology of the Andamans is important. But surely we can develop our strategic requirements while bearing in mind the ecological importance of the Andamans. It is not an either-or situation. Today you have technology and capital and equipment to ensure that. So work with the government to minimize the collateral damage, as I call it, while advancing the strategic interest. I think that has to be the goal of all of us as Indian citizens.
So debates are all about balancing. So I agree to that. The debates are always about balancing and doing finally doing the right thing strategically for the country. I'll come to the final question, sir. The Taiwan question. US withdrew its THAAD missiles from South Korea, which has created a lot of resentment in South Korea because they feel defenseless against the North Koreans, the Chinese. And we have seen, and obviously the defense supply which the Americans have assured to the Taiwanese is going to get delayed because they are getting bogged down in Ukraine, they are getting bogged down in Iran. And we saw the Taiwanese opposition leader reach out to China also. But China also, it is also wary of the American presence. It knows that America is there in the region. It's still strong enough. How do you see this playing out, sir? The Taiwan question, how is China looking at it for resolution?
Well, we don't know when China will move to resolve the Taiwan question. We only know that it will do so at some point in time because it has said it will do so. But I think, again, the conventional wisdom that American withdrawal from East Asia towards the Gulf helps the Chinese is a very, shall I say, simplistic approach. The Chinese are also watching what has happened in the Gulf War. A much smaller, weaker country has been able to punish the much bigger power. and to some extent delay the ability of that power to act. The message to China is clear. You may be technologically dominant. You may have the strongest air force in the world. You may have a remarkable rocket force. That is fine if you want to bomb a country into the Stone Age. But if you want to occupy a country, you have to put boots on the ground. And that much smaller country still has the capability to make it very, very expensive for you. Now, Taiwan is not Iran. Iran has weapons which are 40 years old, except for a few that they have been quietly getting from certain friends. We will not name them. But in the case of Taiwan, they have state-of-the-art American weapons, even now. It's just that, as you correctly said, the future stocks may be delayed. But even now, they are state-of-the-art weapons. They will be deployed against China. And at the end of it all, Taiwan is a very hilly country. They are also watching the conflict. They would ensure that their own missile silos and their missile launching systems and other systems are also protected. They are also taking lessons from this, as China is. And therefore, I think the Iran war will have given China pause to think that, is my military overwhelming technological and military superiority enough for me to reconquer the island? Yes, it is enough for me to bomb them into the Stone Age. But to take an island by force, boots have to be put on the ground. And as you know, with the One China policy, the social implications and costs are going to be astronomical for the Chinese, because it's only one child per family. And public reaction these days is important, whether it's a democracy or a dictatorship. So let us keep this question open. We need to study it much greater. My opinion is that it will have given China happiness in some areas. After all, they would be able to disrupt all traffic in the Taiwan Strait. If a much weaker Iran can do it in the Hormuz Strait. But there is also a lot of the lessons to be learned that China must be drawing upon. And knowing the Chinese as I do, they are studying this thoroughly, and they will eventually put those lessons into action as well.
So we'll have to conclude on that, and with the final observation that lessons need to be learned from your book also. So I again suggest the audience to go ahead, purchase the book, read it, and give us your opinion. Send it to sir or to me. I'll share it with sir, because it is very important to know what the next superpower, it's no longer an aspiring superpower, is going to do, and how it thinks, how it feels. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mayan.